Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is March 2023 and I'm in Ankara, the capital of Turkey. And just for information, wanted to tell people what is the death, the funeral, burial procedure in Turkey, what happens. So what happens if you have a death in the family is you call an ambulance over. So an ambulance, paramedics come, they look at the heartbeat, they look at the ECG, and they realize or they declare that the person has passed away. What they then do is they escalate that call, and in every county, council, whatever is the word, baldia in Turkey, there's a designated doctor on call 24 hours a day. If the death happens in the hospital, the same procedure. So basically this doctor comes and the doctor asks the family what were the circumstances of the death, and then the doctor checks the patient over and that declares that the patient has passed away naturally and there's no need for a postmortem or something like that. Along with the doctor also comes a vehicle to transport the body. So what they do is they put it in a box and they transport the body to the nearest masjid, to the cemetery, which you can't see, but it's behind this structure, and I will talk about that in 1 second. While the body is being transported, they encourage people to bury the person as soon as possible, but they also are sensitive to the needs of the family. Sometimes the relatives are coming and so on. So they said, when do you want the burial? Do you want it right away or do you want it after a little bit of delay? So let's say the family says, no, we want it after 24 hours or whatever. In that case, this mosque, which you cannot see, has a morgue and they put the body there. Then what happens is the family comes when it's time for janaza. Before that, they have designated people who give ghusl or bathe the body. Male personnel for male, female for female. They also ask the family to assist, ceremoniously, for their loved ones, etc. But the ghusl, the bath is done by the people who are appointed by the government. The family can, do a little bit just to feel involved, etc. So the body is now ready. Behind this masjid, there's another masjid in this Ankara Qabristan right here, but this is a small one. This is a little bit outside. This is the main masjid where the activities happen. Once the ghusl is done, then the janaza salah is ready to be read. Outside the masjid, physically outside the masjid in the courtyard section, they do the janaza salah. So they do the janaza salah and then the imam then okays the body to be transported for burial. So it's put in a vehicle and is brought to the designated grave of the person. So this is a brand new section which is not built. I'll show you what it looks like when it's actually built. So there's an imam who actually, recites the du'as, encourages people to recite the du'as, etc. And the burial happens. And after the burial, the imam stands there and they do something called talqeen, where, they advise the person who's deceased how to answer the questions of Munkar and Nakir. And the family is also there, etc. And this person is then buried. The cost of this in Turkey is the person just has to pay for the grave, which at this time, March 2023, is 500 Turkish liras. You can convert that to your local currency by Googling it. 500 Turkish liras. That's the only cost to the family. Nothing for transport, nothing for ghusl, nothing for any other arrangements. However, there is something what the government does here is, let's say if the husband has passed away or the wife has passed away or another family member, somebody's passed away, the government gives the opportunity that another loved one can purchase the grave right next to it to be buried next to it. So that is 15,000 liras if you want to reserve that grave. Husband has passed away, wife wants to be buried there or vice versa. So 15,000, you can reserve that grave right next to it. Okay, so what happens then is this graves look like this. So as you can see right here. However, and I'm talking about what actually happens, I'm not commenting on it from a Sharia point of view. So generally the custom in Turkey is they build this structure, concrete structure called maqbara. The family has to pay for this structure. So there's concrete all around it, as you can see. But the top is basically there's no concrete, it's just mud. Again, what I'm saying is I'm not commenting it from a Sharia point of view. I'm simply telling you what really happens here in Turkey. So that's what they call the maqbara. So the family has to pay for this structure, and this structure, eventually builds up, but it looks something like this. Okay, the family has to pay for the cost of this structure. Then what happens is, in Turkey, after 6 years, they allow for another burial to happen in the same grave for family member or loved one, etc. Unless the person designates, the person wills that I do not want this grave to be reused. So if the person has not willed that, then what happens is a scholar, or a hoja as they call it here, comes, and what they do is they respectfully move the bones aside, and they can bury another person in this grave 6 years later. So that is basically according to the law. And there are many graves here that have double graves. So basically you see 15 years ago there was husband, 15 years later wife, or grandfather, grandson, all this sort of combination. Some family member is buried in the same grave, so there are two tombstones. These structures that you see, the maqbara as they call it in Turkish, right, is not a requirement by the government, but is simply a custom. Once in a while, when I mean, this is a huge graveyard. It's very well put together. It's got sections in here. Each grave is got a number. So this section where I'm standing, right, it has a designated section, and each of this grave has a number, so people know how to get here. When it's eventually built, in between two rows of graves there's a path you can walk, and basically pay respects to your, or make du'as for your deceased, all this kind of stuff. So what I was saying is, there's no requirement in Turkish law to have this maqbara built, but it's a custom here. But once in a while, if you walk around, you do see graves that people don't put this maqbara structure, and it actually looks, natural like this. So this entire section is like this because it is very recent. In this section, from what I'm seeing for the last few days, there are roughly 20 to 25 burials a day in this section of the cemetery. So it hasn't been, finalized. They haven't built this pathway. So in between two graves is this pathway where people can walk, and they can go to the grave of their loved ones and make dua, all this kind of stuff. So it's not a requirement to have this maqbara in Turkish law, but people build them for their loved ones. Sometimes I've seen, once in a while, in between you see graves that are not built and they're left naturally like this. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.